Welcome back. Let's start with the basics of Florida's wildfire season. While fires happen throughout the year, the period from January to June is the most active. Humans are most often the cause of wildfires, although only 1 in 5 of those is done intentionally. Last year, there were more than 3,000 fires in Florida, burning nearly 75,000 acres. Prescribed burns were also done to lower the risk. Almost 285,000 acres were burned on purpose by state and federal agencies. And joining us for more on the local risk and what you can do is Joe Paget, head of the mitigation team for the Sarasota County Fire Department, Jay Bailey, burns supervisor at the Sarasota County Fire Department, and ABC 7 Chief Meteorologist Bob Harrigan, because you know all about the weather.
Yeah, hopefully we get a little bit more rain.
Gentlemen, let me start with you. Where are we now in terms of the danger, and how does it compare to past recent years?
Well, this year, obviously, we're much drier than we were this time last year. And actually, the last 3 years, overall, we were wetter than we are at this point, the last 3 years. But our drought index, I believe, is in the 540 range right now. So we're getting to that critical position right now where it's likely that if we get a fire, it's going to be pretty intense.
Have you ever seen it as critical as we are now?
Yeah, this year compares to probably 2006, I would say, the closest. But 1998 through 2001 were a lot drier than this, and we had a lot more active wildfire season those 3 years.
Bob, why?
Well, I think the main reason that we are fairly high this year is obviously we don't see the El Nino effect that we saw last year, which meant a lot more rainfall during the winter months. It's been unusually dry here, and that's the result of a large area of high pressure, and not too unusual to see a dry year. And as the numbers that you just talked about in the 540 range, the index I remember a couple of years ago, or maybe even more than that, was up to 700 at one point. So we're not quite in that extreme danger at this point, but we could be if we don't see a lot of rainfall here in the next 2 months. And as you talked about, the peaks being April and May for us. Even into mid-June, we don't really start our afternoon and evening thunderstorm pattern until mid-June, so it's a little bit of extended problems here and concerns.
And Joe, Bob had an interesting graphic during the weathercast, which basically shows even if it does rain, that rain doesn't get all the way into the surface, and therefore it could rain torrentially tonight, but that does not mitigate the danger.
Right now we're seeing strong winds, we're seeing low humidities, we're seeing day length getting longer, and all those factors go to dry out that moisture very quickly. So even though we get some rain, it disappears very quickly until we start getting those afternoon showers every day that starts up around June.
How busy are all of you at in terms of the burns that you do to mitigate what would happen if a fire breaks out?
We're seeing restrictions every day on the burns that we're allowed to do. So
Why?
Because of the dry conditions, they're not allowing, today they did not allow acreage burns. They allowed pile burns, citrus spot burners, but acreage burns, and we've been pretty much under restrictions since the beginning of March, just because it's getting dry and it's getting where it's unsafe to actually go out and light a fire.
It's a vicious cycle, but as Christopher just showed in the story, those controlled burns really do have an impact, because that last fire would have probably spread if not for the fact that there was a controlled burn that stopped it in its tracks.
Absolutely. We've done a lot of burning in the last 3 years. The wetter conditions we experienced, really have helped us and opened up places we could burn where we normally couldn't. So fortunately, the last 3 years, we got ahead of the game a little bit. Last year, we did 12,000 acres on Sarasota County-owned land. We did 65 burns. So that's helping us this year.
How long do those controlled burns last? I mean, do they have to be done at each location every year, or can you go a few years before you do it again?
Most areas, once they're burned, they're not going to burn again for 2, maybe 3 years. And then even then, the vegetation's lowered, so if you do get a fire in there, it's easier to manage. You may get a fire and it may burn, it may carry fire, but it's going to be much lower intensity than you would normally see.
And Bob, how long until we really start seeing some rain come in here?
Well, the good news, I just checked the long-range forecast, and the long-range forecast, not always the best in terms of accuracy, but it gives you a little hope. Next week, we're looking for 3 separate fronts to move in. Again, Monday, Tuesday, then another one on Thursday, and then possibly over the weekend. That would help us out considerably. And the next couple of fronts are not all that strong. The ones after that, indications are that it could be a little stronger, give us more widespread rainfall, which will help alleviate the system. And having been here for 31 years, I must say the brush fire season, as far as that goes, has been improving in overall mitigation because of the controlled burns. I've noticed that in the interstate systems too. They've been clearing the foliage out in between the roads there, roadways, and thus stopping the fire from spreading and jumping across I-75. So I've noticed that.
All right, it's a good time to take a break, and you'll give us an update of the forecast in a moment. Our discussion is only just beginning, so stay with us. Welcome back. If you're just joining us, we are discussing wildfire risks in our state, and here on the Suncoast, it's especially important as we approach the peak of the dry season. Our guests tonight are Joe Padgett and Jay Bailey of the Sarasota County Fire Department. We're also joined by our Chief Meteorologist, Bob Harrigan. And Bob, I want to start with you again because even with the rainy season coming, it is problematic because with rain comes lightning, and that starts fires. You know,
I recall driving back home from the Keys and driving down I-75 near Northport, and sure enough, there was a thunderstorm around, and lightning came down, started the fire as I was driving fairly fast, 70 miles an hour. You could see the flames start to build and grow. So that's always a concern when we start our summer afternoon pattern, especially for the first few weeks, because you know these isolated storms that develop, they can send lightning all the way out some 10 miles away from where it's raining. So it may not be raining where that lightning hits. And correct me if I'm wrong, when lightning hits, the fire sometimes doesn't start immediately too. It can kind of smolder for a couple of days or a day and then start up again. So it's hard to find out exactly where the fire may start.
We call those sleepers.
Yeah, sleeper fires.
You know, the Department of Agriculture puts out regular updates on the threat of wildfires, and as of March 24th, there has been a 250% increase in the amount of acreage that's been burned in Florida since 2017 began. We talked in Christopher's report about how this is linked to human activity. A lot of it is not intentional. Some of it is. But, gentlemen, you know, the majority of these cases, how do people unintentionally start fires?
Well, we had a fire that occurred in Charlotte County, I believe it was last week, that was caused by, I believe it was, they were cutting some pipe, and the sparks from that started it. But you see it all over the place, from cars, the catalytic converters, that kind of thing. People riding ATVs off-road will sometimes start the fire. Lots of different ways. They're not intentionally starting them, but them being out, you know, in the wild, it does start occasionally.
And frankly, we got to say, stupid things that people do, like
putting out, throwing out charcoal before they're totally cooled. I've seen that happen. We've also seen people trying, on the other side, destroying evidence by, you know, setting a car on fire. That car fire leads to a brush fire because they park it in a rural area. We see equipment being operated and it's got a bad piece on it that gets hot, friction heats up, starts a fire. So we see a lot of different fires that happen. Most of them are, like you said, unintentional, but sometimes they are intentional.
And let's talk about that for a second. We had a case just last week where it's suspected that children near a playground started it. I mean, kids, you know, sometimes do unfortunate things. But how often is it done intentionally with ulterior motives?
I don't know an answer to that one. A lot of times we can trace it back to something that happened, a power line breaking or a transformer arcing or a car parked somewhere. Those fires like that, we don't know exactly what caused it, and I don't want to speculate. But you know, they do happen. I just don't know how often.
And there are two more areas I want to get to. Number one, what can you do at home just to make sure that your home and your land is safe? Do's and don'ts.
Yeah. We talk about Firewise, and I actually visit people's houses if they call me and they're concerned about their property, and we'll come out and look. And we got just a couple of different pointers like we like to use. One is the 30-foot defendable space area. That's an area around your house. It's not totally denuded of vegetation, but it's an area you keep clean, you keep irrigated. If you go up on your roof, make sure you don't have pine needles and leaves accumulated on the roof and in gutters. Don't stack firewood next to your house or anything else that's combustible. And a final note on that one is if fire department's trying to get to your house, make sure you have a clear ingress-egress of about 12 feet wide, 12 feet tall, because these vehicles are big, and if you impede their access, you're going to impede and slow down their response time to get there to try to protect you, whether it's a medical emergency or a fire emergency.
Jay, unfortunately, the fatalities often associated with brush fires like this and wildfires are wildlife. What are you seeing so far this year in terms of the wildlife and what has happened to them and what kinds of animals are becoming the casualties of these?
Fortunately, the native animals in Florida are pretty used to fire, and they're adapted to it over time. You know, centuries ago, you'd have a fire that may have started on the Micah River, and over a course of 2 or 3 days, it would advance toward the coast. So the habitat was adapted to that, and the animals were used to the fire, and they learned how to either fly away with their birds. Gopher tortoises would go into burrows. So most of them do get away with no problem at all. It's pretty rare that you see any mortality from animals during wildfires. Sometimes in the more overgrown areas you might, but prescribed fires, it's rare to see any at all.
How is Sarasota County doing in terms of resources? Do you have enough resources along with the state to keep a handle on this should we continue to get dry weather?
As we're moving forward right now, we're in good shape. We got several brush trucks throughout the county. Natural Resources, the people we burn with, they have a brush truck. We've actually got a couple on order, wait for them to come in. So right now we're in good shape, but if we get inundated with fires like you've seen in Charlotte County and those areas to the south, that's when they call in resources from outside, and we have mutual aid agreements where we can get additional resources.
And Bob, what other parts of the state, aside from the Suncoast going south, or have really been affected by this so far?
Well, right now we saw that with the Alligator Alley fire a couple weeks ago, and the drought index, or if you will, the Keach-Byram index, is showing very dry conditions from about Tampa Bay southward all the way through Monroe County and the Keys all the way over. So this is the driest area. The Panhandle is not a big concern right now. They're actually in the green zone, basically meaning they're very moist, very wet out there. But for us, basically from Tampa southward all the way down to Monroe County southward, it's dangerous there. And one thing about fires, you know, you talk about hurricanes and how you prepare for them, and it gets all the coverage, you know, when they're out there in the Gulf of Mexico and you see it, you get time to prepare and you have your evacuation plan set up. But with fires, it can happen like that, and you have to be ready to go very quickly. So you don't get the advance notice that you get with a hurricane or a tropical system that you do with a fire, and so it's always important to be prepared and ready to go if something were to break out.
And how much rain do we have to get to lower the likeliness or the danger levels here?
I would say inches. You have to have several inches up to, I mean, you know, get back to the deficit. We're talking 3, and it can't all happen at once either. It's got to be over a longer period of time because most of that is just runoff and doesn't get absorbed by the foliage and also the duff layer, if you will, the leaves and moisture on the ground. And a lot of times the fires will spread, and not just from a tree to a tree, but from the ground to the tree and up.
Right. And what you're seeing this time of year, and it's very common, is you'll get the fronts that move through, and often they're weak fronts, and it's enough to drop a little bit of rain, and people kind of they have the assumption that it's going to be okay and that it's a little bit wetter now and the fire danger is lowering. And what will happen is you start getting the north winds after that, which also usher in lower humidities. So that increases the fire danger.
Well, let me ask you this, and I see this often on the highway. We have so much development and construction on the Suncoast, and developers are building new homes and new neighborhoods, but they have to clear the land. Before they can do that, especially in the situation that we are right now, are there any restrictions on developers in terms of making sure when they clear the land that they get permission to burn the brush?
Yeah, the Florida Forest Service is actually the agency that oversees open burning, and they're the ones that authorize on a day-to-day basis who can burn and who can't. The developers and the people who are doing the pile burns, and they call them ACIs, which is air curtain incinerators, and it's these big boxes where they'll put the vegetation that they cut down in there, and it burns it real clean. They have a little bit less restrictions than we would if we were burning acreage. So, like Joe was mentioned earlier, though, this past week or two, we haven't been able to burn at all. Period. Nobody has. That includes the citrus industry, who pretty much burn every day, and people who are burning acreage like us.
And also, when you see those land clearing burns, if you look, it's a cleared area for several hundred feet in any direction from that pile, and there's really no chance of an ember escaping that.
All right, let's take a quick break, and when we return, we'll have final thoughts from our guests, plus what some of our viewers are saying about last night's topic, funding for public broadcasting. Stay with us. Welcome back. 2017 has been a particularly bad year for wildfires here in Florida, with nearly 60,000 acres burned already, and it is not over yet. How can you stay safe? Our guests join us right now for final thoughts. And Joe, what do we need to do at home?
I think as a homeowner, you need to prepare like you're preparing for a hurricane. Don't do it at the last minute. Start this process, clean around your house, make sure your roofs are clean, make sure you have good ingress and egress for emergency vehicles.
And Jay, just, where are we at? Status report in terms of how critical the situation is right now?
Well, that drought index is creeping up. I think in Sarasota we've been pretty fortunate. We haven't seen the fires we've seen in the rest of the state. A couple of weeks ago, I guess last week, we looked at a map and we were one of the only states, or one of the only counties in the state that didn't have active fire at that time. I think a lot of that is attributed to the prescribed burning we've been doing, in Sarasota County. But we are prone to have fires. It's going to happen. We're going to get some this year, especially when the lightning season comes. So we just have to stay on top of it.
Bob, are we going to be talking about this a month from now?
It's hard to predict. Over the years, I've been here 31 years, it's hard to really predict the fire season. I know a lot of people have tried to, and they say it's going to be a very active one, and then it turns out not to be that active. So it depends upon a lot of these isolated storms that will pop up in May. We'll start to get the return to those afternoon and evening thunderstorms, but the ground will be so dry still then that they can cause some fires. And my concern is, obviously, if you do see a fire, make sure that you report it immediately, because if you don't, that's when things can get out of hand, and you don't want to see the smoke everywhere before, oh yeah, there's a fire. So if people do see a fire, make sure that you report it, call 911, say we see a brush fire starting or something to that effect, so that the firefighters can get a quicker handle on the situation.
All right, very good. Before we go, we want to share with you what some of our viewers are saying about last night's topic, federal funding for public broadcasting. Since 1967, the Corporation for Public Broadcasting has received tax dollars to bring educational, artistic, and news programming to the public. It is particularly important for low-income and rural communities. However, under President Trump's budget proposal, the $445 million agency currently receives would be eliminated. Does public broadcasting deserve federal dollars? Here's what some of our viewers are saying. Carl Mountel writes, no. They are receiving big private grants from left-wing organizations and later want public funds to push an anti-constitutional narrative. Okay. Cindy Rapine writes, I would prefer to give my tax dollars to Big Bird than to pay for a wall. And Ira Cohen writes, no other TV network does. Why should they? They have lots of sponsors. Are you prepared for wildfires? Do you have tips of your own? Join the conversation by visiting our Facebook page at facebook.com/news@7. And FYI, want to watch past Roundtable discussions? They're available on Apple TV, Amazon Fire, and Roku. Thanks to our guests for being here tonight. Joe Padgett heads the mitigation team for the Sarasota County Fire Department. Jay Bailey is a burn supervisor at the Sarasota County Fire Department. And Bob Harrigan is our chief meteorologist. When we return, we'll have a final check on our weather. Plus, privacy lost. Internet service providers could soon start selling off data about your online activity. Find out why the Obama-era policy is being done away with in our primetime headlines.